Nobody in the town of Hollow Creek ever expected the quietest man at the truck stop diner to be the most dangerous man they had ever met. And that is exactly why what happened on a Friday night in October became the kind of story people still talk about years later. The kind of story that starts with a laugh and ends with total stunned silence. His name was Jake Colton, 39 years old, a long-haul trucker who drove 18 hours a day when the loads were heavy and the bills were heavier, a single father raising an 11-year-old girl named Emma after losing his wife to cancer 4 years earlier. He kept to himself. He paid his rent on time, waved at his neighbors, brought donuts to Emma's Saturday karate class, and never, not once, raised his voice in public. If you asked anyone in that town what Jake Colton used to do before he showed up driving trucks and dropping his daughter off at school every morning, they would just shrug and say, "I don't know. He doesn't really talk about it." That silence was about to get very, very loud. The dojo where Emma trained was owned by a man named Derek Vance, a former regional MMA champion who had gone undefeated in 14 professional fights before a knee injury forced him into early retirement. Derek was proud of that record. He mentioned it constantly, to students, to parents, to anyone who would listen, and over time, his pride curdled into something uglier. He liked being the most feared man in Hollow Creek. He liked it when grown men looked away from him in the grocery store. And when a scrawny 11-year-old girl fumbled her forms during a demonstration in front of 30 parents, Derek did not see a kid still learning. He saw an easy target for a cheap laugh. "Come on," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, standing over Emma with his arms crossed. "My 5-year-old niece hits harder than that. You embarrassing yourself, or is this a joke?" A few parents chuckled nervously. Emma's face went red, and her eyes filled up fast, the way a kid's eyes do, right before they try so hard not to cry in front of everyone. Jake was standing near the back wall, arms folded, watching the whole thing unfold. Something in his jaw tightened. Something old. He didn't yell. He didn't storm across the mat. He simply walked forward, slow and even, and said in a low voice that somehow carried further than Derek's shouting had, "She's 11. Back off." The room went quiet in that particular way. Rooms go quiet right before something happens. Derek turned, sizing him up, and what he saw was a tired-looking man in a faded flannel shirt, work boots, hands rough from steering wheels and loading docks. He saw, in other words, exactly nothing. Just a trucker. Just somebody's dad. "Oh, we got a hero," Derek said, grinning at the crowd like he'd found his next punchline. "Big rig driver's gonna tell me how to run my gym." "I'm asking you to stop humiliating a kid," Jake said. "And I'm asking you," Derek said, stepping closer, close enough that a few parents actually gasped. "What exactly are you gonna do about it if I don't?" For a moment, just a moment, something flickered behind Jake's eyes, something the people in that room would later swear looked less like anger and more like exhaustion. The exhaustion of a man who has been asked that exact question before, in places far darker than a strip mall dojo, and has never once needed to answer it out loud. But he didn't answer it that night either. He just took Emma by the hand, told her she did great, and walked out. He thought that would be the end of it. He was wrong. What Jake didn't know was that someone in that room had filmed the whole confrontation on their phone. And by Sunday morning, the video had 30,000 views under the caption, "Local gym owner humiliates little girl, gets confronted by mystery trucker." By Monday, it was 80,000. Comments poured in from strangers all over the country, some defending Derek's tough coaching style, most calling him a bully, and a growing number of people specifically asking the same question over and over. Who is that guy in the flannel shirt? Why does he look so calm? Why does he look like he's seen things? Derek watched the video 40 times that weekend, his pride burning hotter with every replay, every comment that made him look small. By Monday afternoon, he had made a decision, and he posted it himself, a video from inside his own gym, staring dead into the camera. To the trucker who wants to play hero, he said, "I'm calling you out. Friday night, my gym, open mat, anybody can watch. You and me. Let's see what a real fighter looks like next to somebody who drives a truck for a living." The video exploded, 60,000 views in 6 hours. People started calling it the Trucker Challenge. Local news picked it up. A radio station offered to broadcast it live from the parking lot. And through all of it, Jake Colton said nothing, did nothing, just kept driving his routes and picking Emma up from school, like the whole internet wasn't screaming his name. That was, until Thursday night, when Emma found the box. She wasn't snooping, not really. She'd gone looking for a phone charger in the glove box of his truck, and instead her fingers closed around something hard and flat, wrapped in an old towel. She pulled it out under the dome light, a folded American flag, triangle tight. The kind you get at a military funeral. A set of dog tags, tarnished, the chain broken and knotted back together, and underneath a photograph, edges soft from handling, of 6 men in desert fatigues, arms slung over each other's shoulders, grinning like the world hadn't tried to kill them yet that week. Jake stood in the middle, younger, leaner, but unmistakably him. "Dad," she said quietly, when he came back to the truck, holding the photo up. "Who are these guys?" Jake stood very still in the parking lot for a long moment, the kind of stillness that told Emma this wasn't a normal question anymore. And finally, he sat down on the running board and patted the spot beside him. "That's my old team," he said. "We called ourselves the Ghost 9. Team for what?" He looked at her for a while before he answered, like he was deciding whether an 11-year-old could carry a truth that heavy. "I was a Navy SEAL, baby, Chief, led that team for 6 years." Emma's mouth fell open. "You never told me." "Your mom asked me not to talk about it after I got out," he said, voice rough now. "Not because she was ashamed, because every time I did, I went somewhere. In my head, she couldn't follow me to. We lost a man on my last deployment. Kid named Danny, 24 years old, married 11 months. I was supposed to bring him home. I promised his wife I would." He rubbed a thumb over the dog tags. "After the funeral, I made a different promise. To your mom, that I was done being that man, that I'd just be your dad. Drive trucks, live quiet, stay alive for you." Emma didn't say anything for a long time. Then she asked the only question that mattered to her right then. "Are you going to fight Derek Friday?" Jake exhaled slowly, looking up at the stars scattered thin over the truck stoplights. "I don't want to," he said. "I promised your mother I'd leave that part of me buried, but I also promised myself I'd never let anybody make you feel small again." He looked at her. "So I guess we'll see what wins out." Friday night, the dojo parking lot looked like a carnival. Cars lined up 3 blocks deep. A local news van had its satellite dish up. Somebody was selling hot dogs out of a cooler. Inside, the mats had been cleared into a makeshift ring, and Derek Vance stood in the center already warmed up, shirtless, grinning for the cameras, playing every bit the undefeated champion the internet had built him up to be. 14-0, he told the reporter, sticking a microphone in his face. And about to be 15-0, courtesy of a truck driver who thinks manners make him a fighter. The crowd roared when Jake walked in, not because they were cheering for him, because most of them had come expecting a slaughter, and slaughters draw a crowd. Jake wore an old gray t-shirt and sweatpants. Nothing that said fighter, nothing that said threat. Emma stood at the edge of the mat, with her hands clasped so tight her knuckles were white, and beside her, an older man in a faded Navy veteran's cap had appeared out of the crowd without anyone quite noticing, watching Jake with an intensity nobody else in that gym could understand yet. The referee called them to the center. Derek leaned in close enough that only Jake could hear him. "Your girl's gonna watch her daddy get put to sleep," he said, smiling the whole time. "Hope that's a lesson you're proud of." Something in Jake's face went very, very still. The bell rang. Derek came out fast, the way undefeated fighters do, throwing a combination meant to end things early and end them loud. A right hook, aimed to make a statement for the cameras. But it never landed. Jake wasn't there anymore. He'd moved maybe 8 inches, the smallest possible distance. Footwork so economical it barely looked like movement at all. And Derek's fist cut nothing but air. The crowd went quiet. Derek tried again. Faster this time, a real combination. Hands and knees and elbows, everything he had built a career on. And every single strike missed by that same impossible 8 inches, like Jake was reading a script Derek hadn't written yet. This went on for almost a full minute. Derek burning through his gas tank against a man who hadn't thrown a single punch. And somewhere in the crowd, that older man in the Navy cap started laughing softly to himself, shaking his head like he couldn't believe what he was watching, and also could believe it completely. "Come on!" Derek shouted, frustration cracking his voice for the first time. "Fight me! I am!" Jake said, quietly. Derek lunged for a takedown, desperate now, and that was the mistake Jake had been waiting for. In one motion, so fast, half the crowd couldn't even describe it afterward, Jake redirected the momentum, dropped his level, and put Derek flat on his back on the mat with a control so total that Derek's own students in the front row visibly flinched. Jake didn't hit him. He simply pinned him there, one forearm across the chest, complete stillness. The posture of a man who had done this 1,000 times, in situations where a mistake meant somebody didn't come home. "Tap," Jake said, not a threat, almost gentle. Derek, red-faced, humiliated, in front of the cameras, the internet, his own students, gritted out, "Never." "Then, I'm not gonna hurt you," Jake said. "But I am gonna hold you here until you understand something. You don't get to make a kid feel small just because you're scared of feeling small yourself." The gym was dead silent, except for Derek's ragged breathing. That's when the man in the Navy cap pushed through the crowd, stepped up to the edge of the mat, and said 4 words that changed everything. "Chief Colton, Ghost 9. Jake's head snapped up, his grip loosened. And the older man, retired Master Chief Raymond Hutt, who had served 2 deployments alongside Jake 7 years earlier, stood at attention and gave him a slow, deliberate salute in front of the entire crowd. "This man," Hutt said, turning to face the room, voice shaking with something between pride and disbelief, "led one of the most decorated SEAL platoons of the last decade. He's got a silver star buried in a drawer, somewhere he's probably never shown a single soul in this town. He didn't come here tonight to prove he's dangerous. Trust me, folks, if he wanted to prove that, none of you would be standing right now to watch it." The gym erupted, not into laughter this time, but into something closer to reverence. People pulling out phones not to mock, but to capture the moment. Parents pulling their kids closer, and Derek, still flat on the mat, beneath the arm of a man he'd called nothing but a trucker for a week straight, went pale as the truth landed on him like a physical weight. Jake released him and stepped back, offering a hand to help him up, which after a long, humbled pause, Derek actually took. "I didn't come here for this," Jake said quietly, loud enough that the room leaned in to hear it. "I came here because you made my daughter feel like she wasn't enough. That's the only fight I ever wanted. Everything else, all that stuff Ray just said. That's a life I buried a long time ago because it cost me too much. I don't need this town to know I used to be somebody. I just need you to know she's somebody. Right now, exactly as she is." Derek stood there for a long moment, breathing hard, looking at the crowd, at the cameras, at Emma standing wide-eyed near the mat, and something shifted behind his eyes, the kind of shift that only happens when a man's entire self-image cracks open in public, and he's forced to look at what's actually underneath it. "I'm sorry," he said, and it came out rough, unpracticed, like the words hadn't left his mouth in years. He looked past Jake, straight at Emma. "I'm sorry, kid. You didn't deserve that, any of it." Emma, eyes still wet, nodded slowly, and something about her small, steady nod seemed to hit Derek harder than anything Jake had done to him on the mat. The story went viral within hours, but not the version anyone expected. Not undefeated champion, humiliates trucker. It became something else entirely, something people shared with captions like, "This is why you never underestimate a quiet man. And real strength doesn't need an audience." News crews wanted interviews. Jake turned every single one down. He didn't want medals or recognition or a documentary crew following him around a truck stop. He wanted, as he told the one reporter he did briefly speak to, exactly what he'd always wanted since the day he came home from his last deployment. A quiet life, a safe kid, mornings that didn't require a weapon. Derek Vance closed his gym for 2 weeks after that night. When he reopened it, the sign out front had changed. Underneath Vance Martial Arts, in smaller letters it now read, "Character before competition." He personally called Emma and asked, with what sounded like real humility for the first time in his adult life, if she'd be willing to keep training there, promising things would look different from now on. Emma said yes, on one condition, that her dad got to sit in on classes sometimes. Jake agreed to that much, at least. Not to teach, not to talk about the Ghost 9, or Danny, or the promise he'd made at a funeral 7 years earlier, just to sit quietly in the back of the room. The way he always had, watching his daughter grow stronger, one small step at a time. Because, in the end, that had never been about proving he was the most dangerous man in Hollow Creek. Everyone found that out anyway, whether he wanted them to or not. It was about something a lot simpler, something that had nothing to do with medals or titles or 14-0 records. It was about a father who had already given everything he had to protect people once, in places most people will never have to imagine, and who had come home hoping he'd never have to do it again, only to discover that the fiercest kind of courage isn't the kind you show the world. It's the kind you keep buried, quietly, faithfully, ready without ever wanting to be needed, for the one person on earth who matters more than any legacy you left behind. And, on one ordinary Friday night, in a small-town gym, that was exactly the kind of courage the world finally got to see.